So the topic is, like you just said, communicating through depression. And I capitalized the through because that's really the key component. Is it's not communicating about depression. It's when you're feeling the depression, the ability to physically speak. So the impetus for this was my individual struggle with depression and my inability to communicate. I live with my parents, and at 32, that's awesome. And I have a 4-year-old. So there's a lot of communicating that goes on. And I also, last year had a terrible year, personally, etc. And so my depression was severe, and I couldn't talk. And that's not usual for me. And it was hard for those around me to deal with. So that was the impetus, the idea behind researching it. So my hope for this thesis, as well as future research, is to help others that struggle with depression. I know a lot of friends, some family members who also deal with this, and it's a bit of a taboo in our society, and I don't think that it should be. Lots of people, 10% of the nation suffer with depression in any given year. That's 30 million people. So there's an importance to this study and to the other research that's being done that I am actually now really excited to be a part of, that I have found out some more about it. So the theory that I chose to use, one of the first articles that I read was in the narrative form, and that really spoke to me because the only person that knows the depression, my depression, the way that I do is me. I work with a counselor. My family is, sort of educated about it, but that's because of me. So I chose to do the narrative theory so that I could use my own voice as well as my academic voice to give validity to my struggles as well as those of other people. So the type of research that lends itself to the narrative paradigm, the methods, I use surveys on surveymonkey.com. And then I also did one-on-one personal interviews with friends and family. And I actually got the chance to do a small group interview as well as one-on-one interviews. I really liked the small group interview. I found 2 friends that also have depression that were willing to be open and honest with the 3 of us together in a discussion and not feel like there was anything they needed to hold back. And I found a lot of my information from that small group and then was able to go out and do more research in the one-on-one interviews and follow-up questions as well as in existing research. So, and then there's also the participant observer, being myself, using the narrative, are the methods that I chose. You said to stick to just a couple of findings, and that's good because the goal was to find some kind of aid, a coping mechanism, a way to communicate what I initially thought would be verbally through the depression. And I went to my counselor and told her what I was studying. And she said, "Oh, that's physical. You can't speak during depression. It's biological." I had never heard that before. It's fight or flight. So when your body is feeling fight or flight, there are all kinds of chemical reactions that are going on. Your adrenaline starts to pump, your noradrenaline starts to pump, and the noradrenaline, I'd never heard of, just gets your body, it allows the blood to flow from the adrenaline. The sugar is released from your spleen. There's all kinds of things going on in your physical body. It's getting ready for either fight or flight, both of which you need your muscles for. Your lung capacity becomes greater. So when those things are happening, the ability to speak is not a survival skill. We haven't adapted that far, evolution-wise. What that made me think of was 911 calls. If you listen to 911 tapes, the people that are calling for help sound incoherent. Help, get here. What's your address? I don't know, just get here. Because their body is going through all these physical changes and they cannot physically speak. Same thing with for a person with depression, except it's not always an external threat. It's internal. The schemas that I've created throughout my life, the perceptions of self as well as the world around me, cause me to have misconceptions, as well as chemical misfirings. There is research that there are 4 different parts of your brain that don't communicate with each other well, causing the depression. So you've got the scientific, you've got the behavioral, the things that I learned growing up, that some are healthy, some are not. And that's one of the things that is helpful, is knowing to go to a professional to get help with it. One thing that is also important, those 30 million people that struggle in any given year, 2/3 of those go untreated. I try and think of myself when I didn't know that this was depression, and wow, that has to be fixed. People have to be able to get help for this, because it's life altering when you can either get the right medication, if that's the route that you choose, or to see the right specialist, because it impacts every part of your life. It's basically your interpersonal reactions and your intrapersonal reactions. And there's not a moment of the day you're not doing one or the other of those. So it's really important. The other finding, I was surprised. There's a researcher by the name of Daniel who described being a survivor as somebody who knows that they have a problem, can deal with it on some level, even if it's very minimal, and come out on the other side. So I considered myself a survivor. I've been dealing with depression, I think, most of my life. And I've gotten through it this far. I'm, a socially acceptable person in most settings, at least. So why? Yeah. So what is it about me that makes me different? And I think that it was because I'm self-aware through, honestly, most of my communication classes are what have helped me the most. My first class was interpersonal communication, changed my life. So, and then also the ability to go outside of myself and ask for help. So what can we do to help people that don't have those things? Was that the dong?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, perfect. So I asked my friends if they saw themselves as survivors. And they all said yes. However, they did not have the ability or willingness to communicate through the depression. I was really surprised by that. And so what I came out of that was that, for me anyway, I communicate out of necessity. I have to tell my mom and my dad that I'm struggling so they can help me with my son or just leave me alone. My friends and family don't live with their parents, who might be the trigger sometimes. When you live with your mom, you butt heads a little bit. So that became an issue that I was surprised by. Not everybody who is self-aware and sees themselves as a survivor is willing or able to communicate about it. And so the last thing, quickly, that I have come to find is helpful are textual and visual cues. Decorating your space, making to-do lists, using your day planners and calendars. This was a very common theme with those who struggle with depression that helped them communicate. If I'm on my way home and I know that I have had a rough day and I'm feeling that tension build, I can text my mom and say, I'm on my way home, but I'm going to need some space. If I were to physically say that to her, it would come out very angry and not in the manner that I would normally choose to communicate. So using text and visual cues has been the one thing that I learned throughout this research.
Okay. That's right at 10 minutes, Erin. Thank you.
Perfect.
Yeah, so now we open it up to questions, comments from the audience.
I have a question, Erin. Your part of that orienting material was this psychologist or counselor person you mentioned who said, well, you can't talk when you're depressed because it's a biological thing. It seems to go right at the problem that we think of psychotherapeutic counseling as talk. And so how could I go for talk therapy if you're saying a depressive person can't talk? I suppose this is what I'm trying to work out in my head to understand your point, because that counseling is a sort of a staple part of therapy for depression. So I guess then you have to talk about levels of depression, and that perhaps at the deepest level of depression, that might be true, but how often does a person fall into that deeper level? Because it looks like I need to talk to work myself out of it. I'm just conflicted about what you're saying, so try to explain that to me a little bit better.
Okay. For someone who is self-aware, we'll start at that level. So I'll talk about myself. I know my triggers. If I feel a sense of rejection, that's a huge threat to me. And I know I have to talk. I have to figure out what the trigger is and know that it wasn't personal, etc. So it's preventative. When I am already in the depression, if I let it sit too long, I don't want to go to my counselor. I want to sleep. I don't want to talk. However, most people can't shut down all the way. I have a kid. I can't not talk to him. I can't not be a good mom. So there are levels, and there are also levels of motivation. Most people have a support system, friends and family, that even if they don't know that it's depression, they know something's wrong. So going to a therapist is very good preventatively as well as post-depression. It's the ability to let people around them know that something is going on that was really the trigger for this research. Because if you don't know it's depression, it's just that you're in a bad mood. But if you're in a bad mood every 6 weeks, something needs to change.
So you're talking more about the critical incident.
Right. So I use the analogy of a train for my depression because I can see that it's coming. I have this sixth sense about it, so I can see the light coming, I can feel the vibrations. And then if I don't get off the tracks somehow, talk to somebody, remove myself from a situation, whatever it might be, I get hit full force by this train and I can't talk. I don't want to go to the gym. I don't want to do anything. At that point, it becomes physically hard for me to speak. But that's the time when I need to the most.
Yeah, it's just a comment, Erin. I appreciate the courage of you taking on this topic and being willing to be so authentic and really analytical, but also talking about your experiences in the hopes that it may help others. And I think the fact that you found communication as a vehicle that helped you in terms of healing and coping is really inspiring to me.
Thank you. Thanks.
Sheila, did you have any questions for Erin?
No, I thought that was phenomenal. I think she's right in that that's not a topic we discuss openly or honestly, and the fact that she was able to do that and work through that herself and help others work through that, I think is incredible.
Okay, great.